forest's cruel embrace. My name is Michael Webb, but I have not gone by that name for a very long time. Not since the forest cruelly enveloped me within its sinister depths, all those years ago when I was just an innocent child of 3 years old. It was a warm summer day in 2022 when my life took an irreversible turn into the realms of darkness. I was playing happily in the backyard of my parents' home in the woodlands of Montana, my faithful dog Rufus keeping me company as we frolicked without a care in the world. Looking back, I can vividly recall the sights, smells, and sounds of those final peaceful moments. The chirping of birds, the lush green landscape, and earthy scents of pine and wildflowers on the crisp breeze. Then I heard it, an odd, almost beckoning noise, drifting in from the forest's edge. I can't articulate what alerted my childish curiosity so intensely about that strange call, but I felt an overwhelming compulsion to follow it into the tree line. Rufus charged ahead into the thicket, barking excitedly and chasing something only he could detect. Within moments, both the dog and the peculiar sound were swallowed up by the shadowy maze of towering pines and overgrown underbrush. "Rufus, come back," I shouted, bravely giving chase and venturing into the silent emerald labyrinth in pursuit of my furry friend. The dappled sunlight winked out as I pressed onward, the forest closing in around me like a stifling embrace. I could no longer hear the odd noise or Rufus's barks, only the sound of my own footsteps crunching over the fallen pine needles and withered leaves. At some point, I became hopelessly turned around and disoriented. When I tried to backtrack my path, panic set in as I found myself wandering in circles, jumping at every snapping twig or rustling bush. The massive trunks of the ancient pines all looked disgustingly identical, their rough bark like deeply ridged flesh. I felt like the entire forest was closing in on me, determined to swallow me whole into its abyssal gullet. I ran in blind terror, tears streaming down my face as I frantically sought any landmark or path that could lead me back to safety. But safety never came. When night smothered the forest in impenetrable blackness, I'll admit I surrendered to hopeless weeping, curled up in a small hollow of upturned roots as every snapping branch filled my terrified mind with images of monstrous claws or gnashing jaws emerging from the shadows to rend me asunder. By some miracle or cruel joke of fate, I managed to stumble upon an old, dilapidated shed deep in the heart of the wild forest lands. I pressed myself into a corner, shivering uncontrollably as the wail of the wind and the battering of rain on the aged roof created a lonesome, almost mournful symphony around me. The musty odors of wet wood and stagnant moisture filled the cramped space. I yearned to see daylight again, to be back in my warm bed with my stuffed animals and night light to protect me. That's when I first sensed I was not alone in that dreary shack. A faint scratching from the far corner, like the scrabbling of sharp nails over decaying timber, made me flinch. My eyes slowly focused until I could vaguely make out the outline of something crouched in the inky blackness. Something with eyes that seemed to almost luminously glimmer at me as I huddled against the wall in shock. "Walu, who's there?" I whimpered, in a tiny voice choked by fear. The scratching sounds halted for a moment, leaving only pensive silence surrounding us. Then it spoke in a raspy, almost gurgling tone that sent prickly tendrils of horror lancing down my spine. "I'm just a friend, little one. What are you doing out here, all alone in these wicked woods? It's not safe for a boy to be wandering by himself. I want my mommy," I sobbed uncontrollably, my entire body shuddering as panic and despair sloshed through my veins in icy waves. There was an ominous, patient pause before the raspy voice replied, "Your mother's not here, child. Neither of your parents could possibly find you in this forsaken place. You're lost to them forever. But I can take care of you, guide you if you'll let me. All I ask is that you place your trust in me, your new friend." Those final few words were doused in a subtle, stomach-churning menace that raised every single hair on the back of my neck. I didn't know how, but I could somehow sense a twisted hunger in that eldritch tone, like a serpent goading a helpless mouse into its jaws. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to flee from this entity, to take my chances with whatever unholy entities lurked outdoors in the black forests over remaining another moment with this thing. But where could I run? I had nowhere else to go, having been irreversibly severed from the world of warmth and safety I once knew. Perhaps death awaited me if I fled into those primordial woodlands alone. So in those fraught seconds, I made the pivotal decision that would forever reshape my existence. "Okay," I whispered through trembling lips, resigning myself to putting what little trust I had left into this strange being. "Very wise of you." It rumbled with satisfaction. I saw those faint pinpricks of light drifting closer in the darkness, like the glow of dying embers slowly creeping nearer. I could just make out a looming, misshapen silhouette in the gloom, something indescribably not human. I could not even discern if it walked upright or slithered over the shed's splintery floor. My childish mind was too overwhelmed by burgeoning terror to process much more than that. When the entity's presence drew mere inches from where I cowered, it exhaled and my nostrils were flooded with the most putrid, unholy stench, like the reek of decaying flesh baking in the noonday sun, of curling death and hopeless decay. I gagged and retched, my entire body convulsing as foul spittle spattered over my lap. "Shaich," the raspy voice crooned in a tone that could have passed for soothing grandmother, if not for the ominous edge underlying it. "Don't be afraid, sweet child. My appearance startles everyone at first glance, but I mean you no harm. Quite the opposite. I wish to bestow a most wondrous gift upon you, one that will allow us to remain inseparable companions for eternity. Would you like that? Never again be forced to face the dangers of this world alone and afraid." I had not the faintest inclination of what this thing's offered gift entailed. But after days of aimless, hungry wandering through the unforgiving forests, alternating between bouts of sheer terror and overwhelming despair, some deep-seated self-preservation was compelling me towards this creature's embrace like the flutter of a moth to an open flame. I could only feebly nod as my body shook violently with illness and malnourishment. "Good," it grated before something sharp and icy cold pierced the tender flesh of my forearm. I shrieked in agony as something like icy liquid fire coursed directly into my veins. My body thrashed and convulsed against throes of screaming torment, unlike anything I could have ever fathomed in my wildest nightmares. It felt like every nerve ending was being systematically shredded by searing blades. Yet no matter how much I howled and wept, the intense suffering seemed to stretch towards eternity with no hint of relenting. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the tides of agony slowly started ebbing. I became consumed by a gnawing, almost ravenous hunger unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Every cell in my being cried out for sustenance, to be sated upon something that no common foodstuff could ever satisfy. An emptiness that could only be filled by giving into my newfound, twisted nature. The transition was as subtle as a darkening curtain, but as tangible as shedding one reality for another. One moment I was a frightened and helpless child. The next, something grotesque and feral was clawing its way out from within the confines of my physical form, my human essence subsumed by something far more ancient and malevolent. As the transformation took hold, my body contorted and thrashed in unimaginable agony. Every bone seemed to grind and reshape itself into something unholy, accompanied by the sickening popping of tendons and moist tearing of musculature being shredded apart and reformed in a new eldritch design. I could feel my very essence metamorphosing from that of a young innocent into the embodiment of an ancient, primordial evil. It took possession of every fiber of my being like a foul spiritual parasite devouring its host from within. My consciousness was overwhelmed by a gnawing, insatiable hunger that could never be quelled by mere sustenance, an all-consuming yearning for inflicting terror and feasting upon the anguish of others. When the wrenching anguish finally subsided, I unfurled myself from the fetal position to gaze upon my new form in the dim light seeping through the shed's cracks. My body had become an unnatural amalgamation, a tangle of whip-like appendages tipped with serrated bony protrusions, all protruding in an unsettling way from my torso, as if ready to lash out at any moment. My flesh had taken on a strange mottled, bark-like texture like that of a tree's gnarled surface. Even my facial features had warped into something grotesque, with my eyes now pools of hollow darkness and rows of needle-like fangs protruding over thin, withered lips that seemed incapable of anything but a permanent sneer. I opened those new jaws and unleashed a shrill, inhuman screech of both torment and exhilaration, reveling in the luxurious breadth of this feral new form and the unfurling of monstrous abilities that had been kept suppressed for far too long. In that moment, I knew that the wretched human child I had once been was utterly eradicated, sacrificed as fuel to usher this ancient malevolence into the world. You have been reborn, untethered from the weak shackles of humanity, the gravelly voice intoned with clear satisfaction as it beheld my startling metamorphosis. "Now, the true essence of your power has finally been unlocked. You are of the ancient brethren, one of the unath, who has dwelled since the primordial ages, and feasting on the life essence of those foolish enough to succumb to the lure of these dark forsaken woodlands. Welcome to your new existence of eternal hunger and dread." The unath .my new moniker carried with it the haunting resonance of timeless evil, and the vague sensation of ancient knowledge stirring within the recesses of my transformed consciousness. Memories buried across unfathomable stretches of existence before being reawakened within this twisted vessel. I could feel the primordial energies of the forest itself intertwining with my very being, granting me a new symbiosis with these ancient woven realms, the capability to manifest and dissolve into the woodlands at will, to shapeshift under the cloak of shadows, and to breathe essence into the most unspeakable of night terrors. Who ... What are you? I demanded through a guttural rasp, fixing my hollow black pools towards the vaguely outlined entity from which this harrowing metamorphosis had originated. "I am one of the few who endure," it replied with grim reverence. "An eternal malefic presence who has held steadfast guardianship over these darkling woods since before the Alaskan tribes marked the land with their meager footprints upon the soil. For those enlightened few elevated beyond human consciousness, I am also the final rite of passage. The force that unlocks one's true destiny by shattering the fragile husk of humanity to release the demonic sentience kept shackled within. I have ushered you into the sublime through your indoctrination, into the ancient brethren of the unath. You are forever unmade from the harbinger of life that once birthed you, and woven anew into the exalted harbinger of death itself. I knew with unshakable certainty that this entity was far more than the ramblings of a delusional mind. It carried with it the grave gravitas of primordial truth. My childlike innocence had been irreversibly shattered and born anew into an existence of eternal torment and malice, one of the shadowed brethren that dwelled beyond the veil of human comprehension. Yes, ... I can feel the awakening within. I growled in a multitude of layered tones, long-forgotten instincts collectively stirring like a lurking behemoth rousing from ageless slumbers. The essence of the unath courses through me with insatiable hunger. I must feed this,